Today, one of the few signs left that show Chinese worked in the Otago hinterland are the tombstones present in obscure parts of remote cemeteries. Here we are in the Beaumont Cemetery. Now, Beaumont was a location of Chinese mining efforts from an early point of time, and some of the last small claim Chinese mines were here in this area in the early 1900s. Later on, of course, those gold seekers who were still here had to adapt. They became farm hands or worked for people around the area. And one of them is Ah Tai, whose grave here has been restored in recent years. Now, Ah Tai isn't really his Chinese name, so his identity is lost. And in fact, across the fence there are a number of other Chinese graves from a time when Chinese considered as heathens and were buried outside Christian cemeteries. But isn't it lovely that this one has finally been recognised? And it says here that Ah Tai was a respected resident of Beaumont from his early arrival in the 1870s, 1871, right through to his death in 1921. As time progressed, local communities around Otago are discovering their Chinese heritage and commemorating it in different ways. So here we are in the Beaumont Gorge on a beautiful day. This was a harsh and relatively inhospitable environment for miners, and we had two generations of Chinese gold seekers toiling away in the river here and often experiencing some success, but then also the river washing away their efforts. And it's nice now that this has been turned into a cycle and walking trail. It's the Clutha Gold Trail. We have thousands of tourists coming past here all the time, and it's good to see some interpretation of the Chinese history of mining in this particular area. Here we are in the Moa Creek Cemetery, which has only recently undergone some restoration. As part of that, a number of Chinese headstones that were formerly being kept for safety, I suppose, at the Alexandra Central Stories Museum were taken out, and they've been put back here where the miners are buried on this mound of a hill, which is an unusual sort of cemetery. Now, behind me we've got 5 of them, various names on them. We think that this guy here, known locally as Ah Yi, but his real name I think is Su Yi Zhong, is the market gardener, noted for his interesting trick with the horse. Another guy back here, Wong Gu, known locally however as Pennyweight. It's interesting how, you know, the identity of these men was transmuted in the New Zealand setting, and their names, you know, vary according to the different contexts in which they're seen. So Pennyweight, buried back here, a long way from China. When I first started exploring this very historic Dunedin Southern Cemetery 25 years ago, it was very difficult to find Chinese graves. They were lost under the trees, overgrown, headstones, many of them broken, just strewn all over the land. It was very, very discouraging to see it. But in more recent years, there's been a very impressive restoration effort, and now it's signposted, it's interpreted, and the graves have been repaired, restored, replaced, honouring at last the heritage of all those who lie here in this land.
And they've been toppled over for 40 years, vandalised, neglected, and I thought, well, why doesn't somebody in the community do something about it? So they were picked up. The easy ones were done first. Then as time went on, there's bits and pieces of fragments buried in the soil. So they were dug up, glued together and put back again. And there they stand today.
Like many of the places in the Wakatipu here, Cardrona has really boomed in recent years. There's new buildings appearing all over town, holiday homes, catering for tourists. It's really going ahead, and you'd have to look back to the golden period of the 1870s, the scars still on the land behind me there, for a like period of prosperity. But you know, there's been a bit of a problem, and it links to the Chinese story in this way. A number of the old Chinese left here for good, and the ownership of some of the sections was still in their names. Now those sections were left abandoned here, and no one knew how to get in touch with the legal owners, and the government tried quite hard in China, but they in the end reached a deal and sorted out the legal ownership situation, and now those sections are for sale and they can be included in the prosperous redevelopment of Cardrona. With the death of the last of the old Chinese gold seekers in Otago in the 1940s, that Chinese presence here came to an end after over 80 years. Then there was a gap of a generation until in 1973, Dr. James Ning, a Dunedin doctor, and himself a descendant from 2 generations of Cantonese sojourners in New Zealand, He came up to Queenstown and purchased a holiday home. He reckoned at the time that his family was perhaps the sole Chinese presence in central Otago. Now we've come on a generation from then and the situation has changed again. We have growing numbers of Chinese tourists coming through this region and visiting it. We have Chinese businessmen and entrepreneurs investing in the local economy and part of the community. And here we are on Chinaman's Terrace near Bendigo, surrounded by the new Otago gold, wine and vineyards. And among the most successful of contemporary winemakers here is a young Chinese New Zealander, Jing Song. She's won awards for her wine, and her latest vintage Pinot Noir, fittingly enough, is called China Girl. Today, Otago has found great popularity among Chinese tourists. Sadly, few of the tourists are aware of the strong links between their country and the area they are visiting. Back in Dunedin, links with China were further strengthened in 1994 when Dunedin became a sister city with Shanghai. It's early morning in the heart of historic Shanghai in the Yuan Garden. Around me is one of the great megacities of the world, population 26 million and growing fast, Shanghai, the city of the future. It's amazing to me that back in 1994, this city chose to pair itself to become a sister city with little old Dunedin, population, 120,000? Now there have been immense benefits from that in terms of the economic and business links, educational connections, but most important to me, the cultural connections, and none more important than between this garden, Yuan, and our own Dunedin Chinese garden, Lan Yuan.
Shanghai being the powerhouse that it is, that's put our relationship to them with them has put Dunedin on the map. We are hugely important in the New Zealand context with Shanghai because the opportunity to meet with the Mayor of Shanghai as a matter of right, as it were, only is given to the Mayor of Dunedin and the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Those, and so that if you want to approach the Shanghai government as other cities and other groups in New Zealand want to, they've actually had to work through Dunedin. It's an amazing. It's the way that I suppose Shanghai looks at the importance of their sister city relationships. We I think we're about the 28th sister city that they had, and they've got about 60 or 70 of them now, but we are one of their most active and most important.
That strong relationship with Shanghai would be crucial when the idea of a Chinese garden was first mooted in 1998. The evolution and establishment of the garden would become one of the greatest stories of the Chinese in Otago. The idea of Dunedin having a Chinese garden was really first mooted in 1998. It grew out of the celebrations of Otago's sesquicentenary, the 150th celebrations. Now during those, there was a special week, China Week, devoted to a consideration of Otago's Chinese history, and it became apparent that there should be something more permanent to mark that long history of the Chinese in Otago. The story of the gold seekers and their descendants, the very story in fact that our project is all about.
It was originally conceived by the China Week committee as a thank you for giving us about a week in celebrations. It was a long week, I can tell you, for the organisers. And at the end of it, it was conceived a Chinese garden to thank the city for that. And the garden was chosen because it's non-controversial, non-confrontational. People can see in it what they want to see.
The sister city relationship with Shanghai kicked in. The Shanghai government made a generous contribution to the project, which included providing the skilled labourers and craftsmen to build the garden. Locally, a huge drive for funding over several years was ultimately successful.
It took 12 years to build. For 8 of those years, we weren't sure that the thing was going to ever happen.
Now, the original idea of the garden was a relatively humble sort of affair, but because of the quite new relationship with Shanghai, they jumped on it. And they thought they could add something to it, and they did. And instead of a quite humble Chinese garden, we got a really first-rate garden with all the expertise of Shanghai in its design, in its construction, and its realization, such that the Dunedin Chinese garden is an authentic Chinese scholar's garden, like this sort of one, but in Dunedin, and commemorating that long Chinese history.
Lan Yuan, the Dunedin Chinese garden, opened to the public in 2008. Today it stands as a tribute to the hard work of both the modern and historic Chinese communities of Otago.
I'm hugely proud of the efforts that went into to have produced that. And you look at all the challenges that we faced, starting from the fact that when we decided to build a garden, very few of us knew what the hell we were trying to do. And I put my hand up that I said, yeah, we'll do it. But I had no idea what it was that we were trying to do, and I had no idea of the challenges that we had to overcome to actually get what we have now. I'm quite happy that right, I've done what I've done, and the results are out there in terms of that garden there. You know, part of me is part of that garden, because 12 years of my life were put into that.
In 2010, the Yuan Garden here in Shanghai signed a sister garden agreement with Dunedin's Lan Yuan Garden. It's their first and only such arrangement, and although they have many friend gardens around the place, they have only one sister, us. But you'd have to consider, looking around this place, which is really immense and quite complicated, that if this is our sister, she's a very big sister and we're a very little sister. The kind of sister that looks after the little sister and is a kind of de facto mother. So, Yuan, Lan Yuan's mummy garden. Now the Yuan Garden was originally created way back in 1559 when Queen Elizabeth I was on the throne of England. It was built by a Chinese nobleman as his private retreat. China's history has washed through and around these walls ever since. During the Opium Wars of the 1840s, for instance, the British occupied the town god temple just outside the walls of Yuan. In the Taiping Rebellion, which followed soon after, imperial troops occupied the garden itself, and then much later the Japanese invaders of the 1930s damaged this garden quite extensively. After the Communist Revolution in 1949, the Shanghai municipal government began a major project of restoration, and when it was completed in 1961, they opened the gardens to everybody. And every day, this garden is thronged with Chinese who come here to wallow in the beauties of their cultural past. We're here very early in the morning as a result of the sister city relationship they've opened it up to. It's a real privilege. But as I say, if we came here late in the day, we could hardly move here. There's so many people come here. It's a real treasure of the Chinese nation.
Back in Dunedin, Lan Yuan has grown stronger as a result of its association with Yuan and Shanghai. Nearly a decade since its construction, the Chinese garden has become a hub for the Chinese community in Dunedin. After many years of toil, the Chinese of Otago have a place they can call their own, but gladly share with everyone else.
And so this beautiful scholars' garden in central Dunedin stands as a monument to the endurance and ultimate success of the Chinese here in New Zealand. Now, local kaitahu have a saying, "Mō tātou a ka uri a muri ake nei." Not just for us, but for those who will follow. And so the garden stands as a living memorial to the hardships of those pioneer Chinese and all that they contributed to this country and their own.